we are. We are back with two of our most popular guests in the history of this podcast. It's true. Look at the stats. True. The metrics, they don't lie. We're here with Conan O'Brien and Jeff Ross.
It's about time Conan was on Inside
That's
Conan.
right.
The snake eats the tail. Yeah, no, it's nice. We enjoyed it last time.
It was
we
fun.
came on and it's like you put us in a trance and we started regurgitating the crazy story of how how I went from being a Simpsons writer to being the replacement for David Letterman, which was one of the crazier stories I will still maintain in the history of show business.
Yeah.
And I got to tag along.
Yeah. You were
the radioactive spider that bit him.
Exactly. That's right.
Jeff's behind all
Well,
of it.
no, wait. Lauren's the radioactive spider.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Jeff is Aunt May.
Yeah. That works.
It all goes down to this. It's all in the Spider-Verse. Look into it.
You had just gotten the offer to host and take over for Letterman, and you said yes. You took over the 9th floor. It was a totally empty office. It was you at one corner, Jeff Ross at the other corner, and you happened to be there when Letterman taped his last show down on the 6th floor.
Yep.
And so you went down, and it was a powerhouse last show. Springsteen was on it, Tom Hanks, and you went down, I think, and Robert Smigel and Bob Odenkirk. You three went down to hang out.
Well, Smigel was down there already. He was down there, and he called me. Yeah. Robert was down there, and he's a huge Springsteen fan, and of course Letterman fan. He went down, and he called me in my office. And this is before. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone. I don't think he just called me in my office where I was sitting there alone, watching the last show, and it ended. And then he called me and said, "You really should come down. Dave would like to see you," which I thought I would not. I don't think I would have gone down on my own. But he said, no, he would really like to see you, so I went down.
I could see you not going down on your own.
Yeah.
No, it's not quite my speed.
I worry.
You don't want to linger out there in the foyer.
Right.
Yeah. And, but anyway, so I think we covered all that. I think I went down there and...
Well, the way you ended it, the way we ended last time, basically, was Tom Hanks, who was on the show, came up to you, and you said he put his hand on your shoulder and looked right at you and said, I wrote it down, what just happened to you doesn't happen. It never happens.
Yeah, he did. He did say that.
And then Jeff was saying
he didn't stammer as much as you.
Yeah,
because he was sober.
I don't have my glasses on. I couldn't read it.
I love that. Well, let me read back to you exactly what it said. Habada habada habada, dubada dabada dibada, shabada dabada do.
Well, that's a good
I'm
quote
sorry,
too.
I don't have my monocle in.
And then Jeff said they immediately started tearing down.
Yes, they started tearing it down, and that's where we left last time.
And you were like, yeah. And
I think there was a moment of walking around this empty studio. It might have been the next day. But
yeah.
Everything was ripped out, and it was just completely empty.
It was.
And we were just like, this is too weird.
Studio 6A was completely ripped out, and I maintain we had. If you think about it, now, it seems insane to me that. I'm completely green. I've never hosted a late night show. I've never hosted anything. And Jeff's never produced this kind of show before. And we're taking over for Letterman. Everyone's upset because of the way Letterman left. They felt like he was denied his rightful position as the Tonight Show host. Yeah. So people were upset about that.
To succeed Johnny Carson.
Yeah, to succeed Johnny Carson. Instead, that went to that other guy.
Somebody.
And then, so there was a lot of Sturm and Drang and angst. And, I remember very clearly looking at this, Jeff and I are looking at this big empty concrete rectangle. And it's May. You could look up the date, or I think it's May. It may even be late May. I don't know. Probably late May.
Sweeps. So it would be late May back then.
And then
Sweeps mattered.
So if you think about it, we had a premiere date set because the affiliates needed that, which was September 13th. So we don't have. We think about it. May is almost gone. So we've got June, July, August. And then we have 3 months, and then test shows have to start.
Wow.
And to this day, I think that's just not enough time. It's and I didn't have wanted Robert Smigel to be the head writer, but he wasn't signed up yet, and it was a question of whether or not that deal would even happen. We didn't know what the set was going to be. We didn't have a band, no writers, no sidekick, nothing. And I think, I just did this interview in New York with Paul McCartney where he was showing photographs of, the Beatles in 63, 64, when they're coming to do the Ed Sullivan Show. And the point I was trying to make to him was that we all look at these photos differently. We look at them as, here the Beatles are, and everybody knows it's going to work out. Mm-hmm. So we are watching it with that bias. But, and anyone now, when I talk to young people and I say, well, I didn't think I was going to make it, they think, well, of course you were going to make it. But it's 30 years later, and they're going by the bias of, all I see is your shit bouncing around different places, and you're just...
So they might
can't turn it off like Samsung TV.
This tired old shoe that's been around forever. What do you mean you didn't think you'd become a shoe?
They think you're trying to be modest.
Yeah, and if it seemed like it was a miracle that we would ever get this together in such a short amount of time. Didn't you think so?
We had nothing. It was like two of us, maybe one or two other people in this cavernous office with nobody. Empty.
Yeah.
And
did you take turns getting each other their lunch? Or?
Probably.
We did. Yeah.
It's your turn.
I mean, we really didn't have any idea what we were doing.
Right.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
It was terrifying.
And I would go routinely I remember I didn't have much time. There was no time. And so there was this order of things that had to happen, which is got to get the head writer first. Mm-hmm. And I knew it had to be Robert Smigel, because Robert and I were we had worked together on Saturday Night Live. We had done this pilot, Look Well, with Adam West, and we could kind of finish each other's sentences comedically. And I knew we both had this very crystal clear idea of what the show needed to be and how it needed to be silly, and it had to be post Letterman, meaning not ironic, all this kind of stuff. And but there was so much that we had to do, and I remember it was a while getting Robert's.
It took a little longer than we wanted to
get Robert's deal made.
Yeah,
September.
And then
12th.
no other writers were getting hired at that point.
Right, and so we couldn't hire writers till we got Robert on board. And I remembered it's just the bureaucracy of deal making and back and forth, and it didn't happen quickly. And then I remembered at one point, a guy that worked at NBC saying, "Well, let's just move on from Robert." And I thought, meaning this deal was taking a while, so who else will you bring in? And I said, there isn't anyone else. Do you know what I mean? It's just felt like there isn't another. It's got to be Robert. And man,
well, and it did have to be.
It did. No, but I was having heart attacks all the time.
So did you when you said yes to, hey, I'm going to take this over, and now you're here?
I didn't say no. That's a misstatement. Okay. Because to be clelear, there was no would you like to do it? I auditioned. Right. I auditioned for it.
Which means
didn't think I would. Didn't, and then wasn't sure until I did the audition and thought, God damn, that felt right. Right. That felt really good. And Jeff was there, and Jeff, was running it kind of, and Jeff came up after the, monologue and was like, oh, this is okay. Suddenly Jeff was looking at me differently. He's not.
I don't know if we spoke about it last time, but I remember between the two guests, I forget who went first, I wrote we had a script, and on the back of the script I wrote, "You're killing," and just slid it in front of him.
Right. I thought it said, my glasses weren't on, I thought it said, "You will be killed."
You didn't even need glasses.
No, I didn't need glasses then.
Jeff's a great motivator.
Excited,
right.
But I was, so what happens is they don't call and bring you into a room and go, so would you like to do this or not? What happens is I got a call that said, you've got it. Yeah. You're doing it. You're going to go on the Tonight Show tonight and be announced. So there was no, and then there was
no offer. Yeah.
It just happened. And then it's, and look, I'm not complaining because I definitely asked for it, but once it happens, it's so overwhelming. And we didn't have I just remembered thinking, this is no time at all.
Right.
Anyway, I think a big turning point was Robert's deal got made. Then we could start looking at packets. Everyone was sending packets in. And we were looking at them. I think the first person hired was Dino Stamatopoulos, was the first writer. And I remember being elated because Dino, we liked his packet. He had never worked on anything. He came in, and I remembered exactly which office he had. He had the office right next to mine.
Mm-hmm.
And he went in and he sat at his desk and started writing down ideas. And I thought, we have a writer. I mean,
and he knows how to write.
And he's writing something with a pen. we're we're on our way.
Yeah.
I was so grabbing at any good news.
Mm-hmm.
I was busy running around making believe I
Getting
knew what I
lunch.
was doing.
Yeah.
No, but
I did a lot of making believe.
Well, there's one thing we needed was we needed a band and a set. So I think Robert and I were really focused on getting these writers, and you were, saying, okay, because Lorne Michaels is the executive producer, we got to get this set together. And Lorne Michaels had a designer named
Eugene Lee,
and
who
Lorne
recently passed away.
Yeah, who recently passed away. Eugene Lee.
And Eugene and all his, he came with Keith and Leo. It was a whole.
There were all these people that were
from SNL.
There were a lot of
SNL
we had a lot of
veterans.
SNL people at the time helping us.
And I remember, and obviously,
which could cut
helping
both
us.
ways.
No, but what I'm saying is they this began the first major question, which was Robert and I both. We didn't want this to be like an extension of SNL. We wanted it to have its own identity.
Right.
So all these, when the SNL people came in who were great and super talented, one of the first things we said to Eugene Lee was, we just want to make sure it doesn't look like SNL.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, and Eugene Lee had famously come up with this design ethic for SNL, which was, sort of urban,
Very New York,
outside spaces.
Girders, a lot of.
So we gave him
Steel,
that
yeah.
mandate, and that story will continue later. But so he goes off to work on that. And I remember for some reason, I think someone had given me, I have very clear memories of certain things. Someone had given me kind of like a metal briefcase that looked like it was made of like aluminum. It wasn't that expensive, but I had gotten it for Christmas like the year before from one of my brothers or one of my sisters had given me this metal briefcase. It looked like kind of like the kind a drug dealer would use in an 80s movie. And it, you'd click it open and you'd open it. And it was just like this aluminum case.
It should be full of cash.
It should be full of cash, and it should be releasing a kidnapped victim. I remember really clearly, I had this office. There was nothing in it but like an iron desk that I think had been around since like the 50s, and a crappy chair. And then I had that briefcase, and I had writer submissions in it.
You're all set.
But I walked around with this iron briefcase, and I remembered every night I would leave the office, I would pass 6A, and they'd be in there. But
you should have handcuffed it to yourself.
I know, but every night there was nothing happening in there yet. You know what I mean? And every night it would getting closer and closer.
The studio is just still an empty
And
shell.
I would go home and just think, I wish I had used recreational drugs. I think that's the way I could have gotten through it, but I didn't. I just ate potatoes and fried beef.
The truth is, when you have a set, when you design a set, nothing happens for a long time.
Right.
And then when it's supposedly done, it all gets installed in like a day. So there was a lot of time where there was nothing there.
And
it's being built.
We were having, this is,
Conan is
I'm
sketchy.
drawing a
Conan's
rectangle,
drawing.
and I'm holding it
Okay.
up, and you can look this up online, but this is a rectangle. And here's those famous double doors that characters walk in and out of right there. And the Letterman setup had been, I think, desk here, blah, 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 and then an audience here. And this is all the audience, and everything is angled that way, right? Of course, Robert was like, wouldn't it be cool, because this isn't going to be enough space for all the great comedy ideas we have. Shouldn't we do it the other way? Shouldn't the audience be here, and that way the desk can be here, and we have all of this room.
Super wide.
Super wide. And I remember thinking, yes, I agree. So the first thing we start doing is we start saying we want to completely reorient the way 6A is set up. So it goes a different way.
Oh, wow.
And of course, we're dealing with Rick Ludwin, and who has also passed away, but was an amazing champion of mine and Jeff's and the show, and
Late night executive.
Just a great man. We showed it to him, and he was like, "What are you talking about? This means you have like next to no audience, and then this giant long." And Robert and I are
more
characters.
And Robert and I were like, "Well, we want plenty of room so that." When 35 characters come out dressed as a pope and a mule, and there's also a cartoon character, and there's a Zeppelin, there's plenty of room for them, and then Conan can just be in the corner for the occasional guest interview.
You also couldn't move the seats.
There's no room for the guests.
You couldn't move the seats.
Yeah.
They were like built in, like there was remember the rake of the studio?
Yes. Yeah.
It's all like a huge job to reorient the entire.
Oh, so that all stayed in.
Yeah,
I believe that the way it was set up was just next to impossible to change around.
Right.
And yet what are we doing? We have so much to do.
Yes.
Right.
And the first thing we're saying is, I know this is a great boat, but can we make it a car?
Yeah.
And
there was a lot
there was a lot of that. It was another one I remember, which is we really wanted to not be in Letterman's shadow. I didn't, and Robert would say a lot, I just, you don't want to be compared to Letterman. And you think, well, I'm replacing Letterman.
Right.
There's no way to would avoid that. And there was this sense that I'm going to get killed by the press and everybody because Dave is at the height of his powers and I'm like an amoeba. He's this fully formed falcon that can see 10,000 miles and can see
predator.
An apex predator. He's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I'm 3-celled piece of algae that's just replaced him, and I'm going to need 1 million years to grow a couple of legs. And so the funniest thing was, I remember it was Robert's idea. He's like, we should change the name of the show so it's not Late Night. So we were thinking, and I was like, oh, yeah. So we came up, we start planning, and then we came up with the name that we wanted.
Right.
Which was Nighty Night.
Really?
Nighty Night with Conan O'Brien, like Nighty Night, which we thought was just really cartoony and funny and arch and kind of Pee-wee's Playhouse. And so we had a meeting, I'll never forget, in this office in 30 Rock, not in our offices, but a special office that Rick had. And
just where they take you to yell at you.
Yeah, we told Rick, we told Rick we wanted to meet with him.
Uh-huh.
I don't think Jeff was there for this. I think he knew better. I think he was like, yeah, why don't you guys run along and pitch that? So we went up and we went, we're worried about being compared to Letterman. And Rick was like, well, I have to tell you, I think you'll be compared to Letterman. What you would do? And I said, well, we're thinking we're going to change the name Late Night. And he goes, well, let me tell you something. That is we own that name, Late Night. It is a franchise. It is a very popular franchise. It's been very good to us since 1983 or 82. And it's for 11 years. It has been a benchmark, and I think we own that. We wouldn't get rid of it unless there was a spectacular new name. And we said, well, strap yourself in. Strap yourself in. You're sitting down, Rick, because here we go. And we said, we want to call it Nighty Night with Conan O'Brien. And Rick started going, and if you remember, Rick Ludwin's a very proper exec. Like, he's the cartoon of an executive. Mm-hmm. Again, wonderful guy, but he's wearing a tie. He looks like
he's like clip art.
Yeah, yes. He looks like exactly. He looks like
Midwestern.
He looks like he should be a page,
mm-hmm.
and he's wearing like a tie, and his jacket's buttoned, and he's wearing his his chinos and his shoes, and I'm saying it's Nighty Night. And Robert's like, yeah, Nighty Night, and Rick starts to go. Remember this thing he would do?
I think I was actually there.
He started scratching the back of his head and going, okay, and I think he had thing, and I think I could see like he was tearing flesh, and he went, okay, I'll tell you what this, I'll tell you this, it is Late Night, it's going to be Late Night, it's going to remain Late Night, it is Late Night with Conan O'Brien, it is not going to be Nighty Night, and we like backed out of the room, and then, so quickly, our two first attempts to put our own stamp on this are terribly misguided.
Yeah.
But then writers start showing up. We start finding really great people.
I do remember at one point the sound effects guy, what was his name? It'll come to me. And right around the same time, we start meeting the crew, and he comes up and he says, guys, I was the guy on the sound, I hit the when Letterman would throw the pencils through the window, I would do the
crashing.
The crashing of the window, the breaking of the window. So if you want to do that, I know how to do that. And I remember us both going, yeah.
No, it was so funny because
That we will keep.
Constantly people were
You
saying.
remember that?
Yes, I remember that, and I remember also hearing, you can do top 10 list because
NBC.
that belongs to NBC,
Right,
and I thought,
Oh my God.
what are you fucking talking about? As a creative person, I don't want to do top 10 list, and also I'll get I don't want to do it. It's a great thing, but it's Dave's thing. What are you talking about? But so you were hearing. I mean, first of all, there was so many misguided ideas. We had some writers started showing up, and someone had a cat. So we had a late night cat that was living with us on the floor, which is completely illegal.
Yep.
There was a cat living, in 30 Rock, the Art Deco.
It's like a halfway house.
It was the Art Deco, shrine to broadcasting, and we're hiring. All the writers we hired had never worked in television before, and so, but
Odenkirk was part of it.
Odenkirk was came in and was helping. Andy Richter. I mean, I've told this story a million times, but we heard from Jeff Garlin. Jeff Garlin said, "Oh, you guys should talk to this guy Andy Richter. He's really funny. He's in the Annoyance Theater in Chicago, and he's out in L.A." And so, I think Robert had met with him, so I had to go meet with him. So I just met with him at a deli, like in the Valley. And
Yeah, I remember you guys eating borscht.
No, not you guys. It was a really hot day, and I walked in and I said, I'll have whatever. I'll have a Coca-Cola and a corned beef sandwich, typical Irish.
That's good for hot weather.
Yeah, and he said, I'll have the borscht. And I said, he sounds like Roseanne. But I remember what I remember is immediately. I mean, it's just like a good date. It was just chemical. I just liked him right away, and we fucked around and talked at the table. And I left the meeting, and I called Robert and I said, we got to hire him. And Robert said, he hasn't submitted a packet. We have to see his writing. And I was like, I don't know that we do. He just seems like a guy we need. And Robert said, nope, we got to see his packet. So we asked for a packet. Andy wrote up some stuff. We read it. It was good. And so we said, I was so relieved. Because once Andy showed up, I started to feel like it's like Robin Hood. We're starting to get our people. And we have a cat. And then it's getting later and later in the game.
Test shows.
We're not there yet because it's time to see a design for the set.
Oh, right.
And so.
Right.
And there's been people off working on this.
Well, working on the design.
Yeah.
So we had said to
Eugene
Lee, I want to say Eugene Levy, which don't get Eugene Levy to design your set. No, Eugene Lee. And Eugene Lee, again, I will stress, Eugene Lee, a very talented guy, and he'd done stuff on Broadway, and he had done all those iconic sets for SNL, so really a brilliant guy. And he came in, and we just kept saying, what we don't want is the outdoor New York architectural, like wrought iron kind of thing. SNL. We don't want that.
The rent set.
Yeah. And so he came in, and he had this cardboard thing, and it was under a blanket, like a blanket. Under a blanket. A voila. He wanted to do a voila. So we get into a room, and it was the room that ended up being, you would know it, it was the big meeting.
The conference room on the other end of the hall.
So we're in that conference room. The show is now has to premiere in 6 weeks. Test shows start in 4 weeks. And Eugene comes in, and he says, "Okay, well, here it is." And we're all much younger than this guy. And he's like, "Okay, well, here it is." He puts it down, and he goes, "And voila!" And he removes it, and it's an iron spiral staircase.
It's SNL. It's SNL.
It's SNL. It's the SNL set, and he's
but it's iron instead of copper.
But
it actually leads to that set.
Yeah, but he's telling us this is what I'm going to do, and my heart sinks the minute I see it, and I can all of Robert, Jeff, and we're just like, and then so I start to say, okay, well, the thing is, it looks a lot like SNL, and we're really hoping to go in a different direction than that. I don't think
you got the whole sentence.
No. Well, what I did is I said to say, like, we don't want to do the whole and he said, I'll never forget, I said some sentence, and Eugene went, okay. Well, when he was holding it, he said, well, okay, if you don't want it, then maybe you can get someone else to build the fucking set. And he tore it up and threw it against the wall. Threw it against the wall and stormed out. Door shuts. Pieces of cardboard on the floor.
Yeah.
And I know exactly that it faces south. It's now 6 weeks out. The designer just tore up the set. He's an older guy than me. He's an adult, screamed at me, ran out of the room. I looked out the window, and it's the closest I've come. I swear to God, I thought I could just go. I could just go out the window because...
And you would win the argument then.
Have Eugene come back and throw you.
Yeah. It was the beginning of a few low moments to come.
And there were many low moments to come, but that was...
Did he apologize? Did he... No.
Well, no, not really.
All right.
Not really.
Wow.
No.
That's so dramatic.
He did come back.
He didn't really come back. About a year later, after we were on the air.
Well, we needed a set. So he didn't do the set at all?
No, Keith Raywood did the set.
Oh, Keith Raywood did it. Okay.
Yeah.
So he didn't... So, yeah, we ended up... Now, of course, on our own, we made plenty of goofy decisions because exit that decision, and then what do? We talked to Keith Raywood, and he builds basically... And again, this was a lot of at our direction.
He was under the gun, and he didn't have time.
Yeah, so Keith is... This is not on Keith, and this is on us saying kind of what we want, and... We get this, it's like a nice little room. If you watch the beginning of the show, the late night show, I still have a lot of affection for it but it looks like a dean's office. And the other funny thing is the color that we wanted.
There's a lot of law books.
Yeah, I was looking for any other job at that point. But the color was mustard.
Right.
Now, here I am.
You always refer to it as a mustard-colored set.
I don't know much about... Of course, I don't know anything about anything. If I know one thing after all these years, it's put a guy with my coloring, who's super pale but has blue eyes and red hair, against blue.
Yeah.
It just works. Mm-hmm. Don't overthink it. No! Say... The young idiots
opposite of the color
who wanted to reorient the studio, call it Nighty Night, get a cat, just making all these crazy decisions left and right. Mustard yellow, and I think a lot of viewers, when they ended up airing the show, thought I had jaundice. I think his liver's failing was the most common.
I think we might have changed it like 6 months in.
No, we did. No. Well, I mean,
maybe
you can
year.
see if you see those, it lasts for a while. We weren't worried about this. We were more worried about us lasting rather than we just thought someone else will be on this.
I guess it was the idea of asking for a new set was at that point
down on the list.
Yeah, it was way down the list. But we start to get the set squared away. Meanwhile, there's no band.
I was going to say, did you have the band yet? No.
No, but what happened there was I was staying in Midtown, and
Riga Royal Hotel.
At the Riga Royal Hotel, and I'm under so much pressure.
Oh, so you don't even have an apartment?
No.
Yet?
Oh, I have a hotel.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So I'm under a lot of pressure.
You really weren't planning on staying long.
No. I was under a lot of pressure, and I remembered I never get headaches, but I was getting headaches,
Yeah.
and I'm up in my hotel. And trying to figure out how are we going to get through this, or how are we going to hire these people, or how are we going to shoot, what should be the sketches that we do that are going to really represent who we are right away. And I have a headache, and there's no aspirin. I'll never forget, I asked for aspirin at the front desk, and they said, we don't have it. So I went, oh, okay. So I went out and I walked down the street and I run right into Max Weinberg from Bruce Springsteen, and he's walking with his wife, and I recognize him, and he recognizes me, and he goes, Conan, hey, Conan.
Yeah.
That's what he called me for 30 years
Conan.
after that. Conan. And we chatted a little bit, and he said, I'm telling you, I know how to put this band together for you. And I just thought, well, maybe he does.
He got right into it with you on the street?
Pretty quickly.
Wow.
Yeah,
he had been there for 3 weeks.
Yeah, he
Outside
was the
the
one that
hotel.
stole the aspirin from the hotel
Exactly.
and said, make sure he walks south. No, but whatever happened, we were chatting, and
Yeah,
he said I
yeah.
could do it, and I said,
Yeah.
okay, well, definitely we're looking. And I thought, I know that he was no longer drumming with Springsteen. Springsteen had gone solo at that point.
He had famously fired the band.
Yeah.
He had gone all Nebraska.
What's that? Yeah. No, this would be Tunnel of Love.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he says he can do it. I don't know much, and there's a lot of craziness, behind the scenes craziness that would take forever to explain. But basically, there ends up being an audition, and there's a couple of bands that are put together.
And we videotaped them.
We videotaped them, and
Probably videotaped 4 or 5.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we're sitting in there, and I'll never forget. John Lurie was one.
Yep.
What's the name of his band? John Lurie
The
and
Lounge
the Lounge
Lizards.
Lizards.
Was it the Lounge Lizards?
I think
or was
so.
it a band he put? I don't remember.
Maybe it was a band he put together, and they were really good, but it was ironic and kind of.
Very hip.
It was very hip and very downtown, and I remember thinking these guys are amazing, and I have a lot of respect for John Lurie. He's great. I remember thinking, I don't know if that's the way to go. And then we look at someone else, and then I hear Max Weinberg's here, and he comes in, and he's with Jimmy Vivino, his brother Jerry Vivino. He's with that crazy horn section, the bass player.
And I.
You knew them.
The La Bamba and Pender, the trombone player.
La Bamba of year 2000. Year 2000 fame.
And Mark Pender, the trumpet player. When I was Diana Ross's road manager 10 years earlier, they were the Asbury Jukes horn section, which she hired to go on the road with. So I was on the road with those. I knew them, and I walk in, and we hadn't seen each other in 10 years. And it was I was thinking to myself, I didn't say out loud, I was like, is this an omen of some sort?
Right.
They run into these guys. Anyway.
So they sit, they launch into it, and I want to say they played, I think they played the Peter Gunn theme.
Correct.
And they sounded amazing. Now, I wasn't crazy about that because that was a song that G.E. Smith used to play at SNL.
Oh.
He's doom doom. So a sketch would end that had no ending. Grapefruits. I thought this was a deli. No laughs. Doom 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 da da doom 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 na na. By the way, that would be a sketch that I wrote. And then but then they said they had something else they could play, and they played.
We played a few songs. I
Yeah,
think.
and they play this thing that goes. I'm gonna remember what it is. Da 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 da. Da
Sort of a Cajun,
da,
like a-
Cajun.
Oh,
Da da
yeah.
da 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 da.
Everybody.
Da 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 da. And it was, and
Oh,
then
yeah,
it kicks
yeah.
into this whole thing. It does that, and then it kicks into a whole thing. And I
Echo.
swear to God, I was like, this is it.
It was obvious.
Yeah.
And I leaned over to Jeff and I said, "Buy me this band."
Daddy.
No question, no fucking question.
I don't know
this
if you
is the
remember
band.
this. They had a second keyboard player. Then.
Yeah.
There was 2 keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we got into it, it was like, we can't have 2 keyboards
Right.
for whatever reason. I just
Scott
remember now.
Scott Healy shot the other guy.
He did. It's no joke.
But anyway, so suddenly we have that band.
Yeah.
And then I'm starting to think maybe there's hope. And
We'll
then,
have the band play for an hour.
Yeah. And then
Yeah, all these little building blocks once they start assembling had to.
and
Cheer you up a bit.
Lorne, I would weigh in on different things. Lorne wasn't crazy about the band.
Right.
He didn't have a problem with the band. He just knew that I was hiring Bruce Springsteen's drummer. and he said, the press will go after you for making a 70s move. You know, it's 1993, and this is a 70s
I think he
move.
said 80s.
Oh, I remember. He said 70s. It's like, he's pretty big in the... But anyway, he said
He's trying to make a point.
He wasn't thrilled about it, and I think he was also getting some maybe advice that to go a different way.
Right.
From someone, and I dug my heels in. I dug my heels in on Robert and said it had to be Robert, and I dug my heels in and said it has to be Max and these guys. And
which I'm sure took a lot for you to do when you're there and already kind of feeling grateful to be there.
You know what's interesting? Not when you know you're right.
Okay.
Like that's the weird thing
great.
is if I don't know I'm right, I don't know. But when you know you're right, you're right. You
sensed it.
Well, it's also conviction. I mean, there were stories later on that we'll never get to that decisions were made based on conviction and not anything much more than that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was a real, almost, it was in its own way very an ideological show. There was a lot of, this is what the show has to be. And
almost like a thesis was written.
It was like if there could be like a Bible almost written about this is the kind of comedy we do, this is the kind of comedy we don't do, and I think I felt that way, Robert felt that way, and it's got to be, Letterman's thing, which was so brilliant, was that there was the talk show, which is Johnny Carson, then there's the anti-talk show, which people thought which was more Letterman, which is ironic. Right. And then this has to be what's next. And it was almost this sort of postmodern, it's going to be a mix of Pee-wee's Playhouse and SCTV. When we do False Reality, I won't wink at the camera and say, like Dave had this way of always letting you know, I'm David Letterman, I'm not buying any of this shit, so people can rant and rave around me.
It's all happening.
But we all know what's happening here. And our thing was, he's brilliant at that. It's great, but ours has to be, if I'm in the audience and someone stands up and he's a sea captain, I need to completely believe that he's a sea captain. Or if a sketch calls for me to be suddenly broke and crying and wondering and at my wit's end, I have to really commit to that.
Yeah, you can't break character.
I can't break.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot. We wanted animation. We wanted puppets. We wanted real silliness.
And what was really important is that nobody was watching over us.
Oh, right. No, and that's true.
We were, I mean, other than Rick, who was in L.A., and we were in New York, we just kept going and nobody was really paying attention.
And I think that might be the most crucial point that Jeff made, because everyone, even if I was not in that situation and someone told me, they picked a guy who was 29 when I auditioned and has no experience, and they picked a producer who's done some work with the Kids in the Hall, but most of his work has been in music, and there's no way that they're not all over them. But we were in New York, and most of the people are in LA, and
it's still a little surprising. You guys must have given off some sort of confidence. Well, at least when these other people were
that's
around.
What I say. I spent most of my time faking it and making like I knew what I was doing until I figured it out. You know who actually was helpful? Morty was helpful.
Yeah.
Robert Morton, who produced the Letterman show at NBC and then went with him to CBS.
Right.
He's a close friend of mine, and I would call him about certain things. And his basic advice was ignore everybody.
That's
great advice.
That's the advice you needed. Yeah, because otherwise you let all those voices in.
But there wasn't even anybody really interfering.
It was, and also I think there was another element here too, which is, if you get too close and it's a disaster, you don't want to get blood and brains on.
There was a lot.
So I think there was a little bit of
a lot of
that's.
I'm going to say actually a lot of. There's me, and there's this feeling of like this kid could get killed, literally killed, on television in a month.
I don't want to be in the blast zone.
I don't want to be in the blast zone when people say, "How the fuck did this happen?"
Right.
So I'm happy to kind of hang back. And then I remember another thing from that summer was some marketing guys came in and told us what their marketing plan was.
Ooh.
Because they say no one knows who you are, so we're going to tell them. And it was mostly about how I'm tall.
Right.
And it was this whole, they had these boards like, he's taller than average. He's 6'4", and
he could touch the rim when he jumps.
Exactly. And I that was another moment where my heart was sinking, and I was thinking, when people watch television, they don't care how tall you are, especially
it doesn't
if
really translate on screen.
That's not really.
It definitely doesn't translate. We learned that.
We've learned that. Everywhere I go in life, people cannot believe that I'm a large man, because my personality is that of a very small, petty man.
I felt like I was personally, I was like a blender. And I was like the cover of a, when you make a shake and you put everything in there and you hold the thing on so it doesn't become a mess.
Yes.
Right.
I think I was that.
Yes.
You're tamping
For
it
a
all
long
down.
time. I was just holding it all in one place. So it didn't.
And I was a
become
pureed banana.
a mess.
Robert was some kale and protein powder. Andy was maraschino cherries, which are not doctor advised. I remember some of the moments I remember a lot from this summer was, okay, this is where the Ford Taurus comes into the picture. I had left Saturday Night Live and gone to The Simpsons about 2 years earlier and needed a car, so I bought a, don't ask me why. I'd saved up all my money. I never bought anything. And I decided I want that. I heard there was a Ford Taurus that had a stick shift. It was kind of...
Say no more.
That was the part I couldn't believe.
Yeah, and I just remembered thinking, this is so me. This is right up there.
The ladies will love this.
This is right up. This is a real panty dropper. This is. I always had to be that guy. I couldn't just go out and get like.
Right.
I had the money to get,
Clearly.
a nice BMW
Yeah.
or something. But no, I was like, wait a minute.
You got an ironic car.
Yes, I got an ironic car, and I thought it was cool because it has this special engine. It's fast. It's got a stick shift, but no one knows because it looks just like a Ford Taurus that a mom would like drive kids to soccer in.
For you.
Yeah,
No,
exactly. No, who knows?
It's a Ford Taurus SHO.
That's what I'm saying. Super high output.
Yeah.
It was called the show, and so I get that. So then I take that. I have that, and it's in the parking garage. It's on the south side of across from the marquee of NBC.
Right.
And I remembered and I'll never forget, the cell phone would just make kids laugh today. It was this giant, it was the first time I had a car phone.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Well, I had one installed, and they were giant.
Some of us would not remember those days. Some of us would.
Jesse, I'm telling you, you would laugh really hard at this thing. It's really big.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Like
doesn't
square,
really work. Is the other thing. So I remembered
because no one else had
curly
one.
antenna the curly antenna on the back of the
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like a CB radio.
So I would, when there was a weekend, I would just get in that thing, that Ford Taurus, and just drive, because the city was so much energy and nervousness, and everywhere I went, people were like, "You're that fucking guy who's going to die in a couple of weeks." And so I would just drive out
I
of...
saw him while he was still
I
alive.
saw him. You could tell he was going to die. And yeah, I'd see... And so I would drive out, and my parents had a place in Westerly, Rhode Island, and I would go there on the weekend. And I remember Lauren would call me, to sort of check in on how it's doing and everything.
Have you run away yet?
And really... Max Weinberg, and I'm driving, and I'm holding the phone, but it's terrible technology, and there's probably 3 cell towers in the Northeast at that point. Right. So he'd be like, and the one thing you need to remember to do is, and
whatever you do, don't.
And whatever you do, don't. And I think one thing you need to obviously do is, and I'm also trying to shift.
Sure.
And you can't shift and talk on this big clunky thing. There's no hands-free. So I crashed a lot, and it was just a big disaster. And
I love this mental picture of you.
And then I went to my parents' house, and they had this white house with just a little picket fence. And I get there, and I'm the show is in a couple of weeks, and I've parked my Ford Taurus in the backyard. And I'm just sitting on the front porch the next morning trying to stay calm. And I'll never forget this. I'm sitting on the front porch with my dad, and there's this little white picket fence that has a little ivy around it. And I'm just telling my dad, and he was like, well, I think it's remember, it's all going to be okay. And I started to relax a little bit when this big truck came around the corner, misjudged the turn, and knocked down the picket fence right in front of us, crashed it, knocked it all down. And we're both sitting there, and my father went, you should go inside. You're a known person now. Like, I shouldn't be there in case someone comes by. They might go, oh, wait a minute, it's that guy who's going to die in a couple of weeks. You know, maybe it's...
Was that his fault?
It was at his fault. So I remember going inside and thinking, this is an omen.
Yeah.
That, you know, Lauren was like, get a truck in there and kill him.
Eugene Lee, drive up to...
Yeah, it was Eugene.
We need you in Rhode Island.
You didn't like my set? Well, you're going to die. So things like that were happening all the time. I did get an apartment that was right across... I sublet an apartment. You remember it was 65th. It's right across the street from Tavern on the Green.
Right.
Oh, okay.
On the park.
On the park. But when I'd look out and I could see the air conditioning fans and all the lights on Tavern on the Green, and I used to look out that window and just think, I don't know. I just don't know.
Would you walk?
If I jumped, would they shred me?
Right.
I know.
Shoot, there's a grate over them. God damn it.
You were going to ask, did we walk to work? Because I lived in the neighborhood also.
Yeah.
You do a lot of walking to work.
Oh, I bet.
It's a great walk.
It's also a great way to just grind through everything in the morning. And
also,
burn off some energy.
Became, you know, the walk to work became the cold open, which I think was really important because, I mean, that's coming later on, but it's not time to maybe go over that one yet. But the cold open for the show is basically me walking to work and people saying, you better be as good as Letterman. And that was basically what it was very autobiographical. It was heightened and made ridiculous, but it was very true. And
very well done.
Yeah, I remember when I watched that, it's like, oh, you just believe that's why it was so funny right away, because you know that was what everyone was saying.
Exactly.
Well,
what your mind was. Yeah.
Also, I'll tell you this: I was told in no uncertain terms, do not mention Letterman and don't talk about how you're replacing Letterman at the beginning of the show, and talk about digging in your heels. Right. Robert and I write this thing where I'm walking. It starts with, I wake up. It says September 13th. People on, I think we got real people like John Tesh or whatever to say like, well, Entertainment Tonight, big day, Conan O'Brien's going to take over, and he better be as good as Letterman. Right. And then me walking to work and everyone saying, you better be as good as Letterman. And I just knew that I needed to play it total cheerful.
Oh, horse and Central
this horse, you better be as good as Letterman.
Brokaw did it.
And and then Brokaw came in and did this great thing where, it was important that I just be like, you bet, like super happy and super cheerful and not breaking at all. And then Brokaw said he would, and he was great. He comes off the elevator and he walks up to me and he goes, Conan, I just want to say welcome to NBC. And it's a big deal, like for Tom, and Tom Brokaw was close with Letterman, so it was a very cool thing that he did this.
Yeah. Yes. He was always great.
He was great. He's a great guy. But he walked up to me and went with that incredible voice, Conan, Tom Brokaw, I just want you to know that, you have my utmost confidence, whatever. Everyone here at NBC is rooting for you. And I say, thanks a lot, Tom. And then he says, but remember, and he screwed up his face and he went, you better be as good as Letterman. And he held up we told him this note, but he held up a saltine cracker and crushed it, and then lets all the pieces fall, which is but that was so our show. I love that was in there because
it's great.
It's so stupid, and our show was all about gravitas, and then deflate it with a little piece of stupidity, and he walks off.
But also you finally get off the street where everyone's saying it to you, and you're like, okay, I'm in the building now. I'm away from that, and it's Tom Brokaw.
And it's Tom Brokaw. And then the part that was dark, but I think people liked, is I go into the dressing room. Everyone's whistling. And you can't see what I'm doing, and then you realize I'm making a noose, and get up and I put my head in the noose, and I'm just about to hang myself when they say it would have been Hollander.
No.
Conan, you're on.
Yeah, it might have been Hollander.
Conan, you're on. And I went, oh. And then I realized there isn't time for me to kill myself.
Right.
And so
tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah, and that's
I remember.
And I remember like playing that and being backstage and hearing it kill. like an audience really laughing hard. And that helped so much to come out.
I remember I kept thinking I have to show this to Ludwin, to Rick Ludwin. And I know he'll think it's hilarious.
Right.
Up until the end.
Okay.
And that I would know that dark ending.
He'll want to pull back.
That and so we sort of waited as long as we could wait. I think I don't think it was the day of the show, but it was late when we showed it to him. And I remember him going, he's like laughing, and then it gets to the end, and he's like, oh. And I go, but he didn't like, he went, okay.
He didn't say no.
No, he went, okay, but he went, oh. Okay.
I have a really funny, every now and then someone will find photos. Someone was taking photos that day.
Oh, wow.
And so we're sitting on Central Park West where the benches are. The stone wall's there and the park is over the stone wall. And we're waiting for the next shot to be set up because that's how I'm walking down to work. And there's photographers from the Post following us, and everything was just back in the crazy days.
Wow.
Everyone was like wondering, what's this guy doing? What's it going to be? But I'm sitting there. You're on a cell phone that looks really funny because it looks like you're in the Korean War.
It's got like an antenna.
Yeah, and you've also got this curly fro.
I had hair.
You got a curly fro, and I look 19.
Right.
And I'm wearing, the style at the time was this kind of big shoulder. I'm wearing a jacket, but it's got kind of like padding.
Pads?
Yeah. And then like this, wide tie. It was just a weird transitional time for men's fashion. And my hair is this big floppy thing in front of me. And we're just sitting there and we're making this thing. And I was always, as anxious as I was and rightfully afraid, and I was always okay when we were making something. And so that's also when we started shooting. This is before the premiere, backing up, but getting close to the premiere, we had this idea that we want to do this kind of, because we were kids of 70s television. Shows used to say, last week on Kojak, and they would show dramatic stuff. So we decided we wanted to shoot very labor-intensive and realistic things. Last week on Conan O'Brien, and it would be me saying to a woman, "I'm sorry, my dear, I'm leaving you," and she'd throw champagne in my face, and I'm wearing an ascot, and it was all shot like Dynasty or
sets and locations,
sets
and wardrobe and
really
guns, and
craziness.
We worked so hard on these things, and shots of me laughing maniacally, Andy firing guns, me passionately kissing a woman, and then someone jumps in with a knife, intercut with car explosions, all this kind of stuff. And the whole time we were making those, I was happy.
Yeah.
Because I knew how to play that attitude.
That felt right. Yeah.
I knew how to play, frankly, my dear, I have to, that soap opera kind of bullshit.
And pre-tapes, you have all that control over it.
Pre-tapes, you have control, and we were shooting them, and God, when we were doing that or shooting the cold open, we worked our asses off.
We were busy.
And we did a ton of preparation.
Yeah, no, we were busy. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, even when after we went on the air, it was crazy. It was we were there all till midnight every night.
Oh, we were never left.
Well, once the show started, it's just
well, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I was wondering leading up, how much were you banking comedy, or were you able to?
We were banking as much as we could, and I will say, we banked given those parameters, we banked as an impressive amount.
And not really knowing what type of thing, like things were too long, things were didn't make sense. Like we didn't really until you're on the air and you're doing it, as you guys know, you don't really know what you're doing.
Also, and we were testing things out. Like we tested out Clutch Cargo, which was an idea that Clutch Cargo was a terrible cartoon from the 60s, early 60s, where they couldn't even afford animation. They would just draw the people, and then they would burn their real mouths in. And it was a guy, Clutch.
Real lips.
Real lips, and his name was Clutch Cargo, and he was like, all right, we better get going. And literally the head would slide out, and you'd hear like footsteps. Terrible, and so we thought it'd be really funny, and we came up with we were testing out the Clutch Cargos. We had a lot of ideas. Year 2000 was something that Robert. It was a Robert idea that we had done in Chicago.
Live show
the live show there a couple of years earlier in the summer of '88, and there was a writer's strike, and so we went to Chicago and did this show, and it was people making predictions about what was then the distant future. In the year 2000, pigeons will be extinct and bald eagles will darken the skies. It was just weird, like Jack Handy's small thoughts. So we knew we were going to do that. We'll do it with flashlights. We'll do, we had a lot of ideas, and we were shooting a lot of content. We shot a really funny piece where, Bob Costas did a great thing for us where we showed
funny.
We showed a clip of him. Yeah, because he was doing Later with Bob Costas, and he agreed to do shoot a thing where he's interviewing the old tree in Wizard of Oz that has the old apple tree that ends up throwing apples.
He did a good job.
And he was, there's a guy with great comedy. Yes. Bob Costas has great comedy chops, and he was really funny. And along with Brokaw, to get these guys are established. I'm the person who really shouldn't be there. And they were also established, and they were fantastic.
Yeah, they were very helpful.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, we shot something. We had an idea, and we started to bring in audiences for test shows. And I remember that was fascinating because people were coming in just basically to see. They weren't told what they were going to see. And I remember...
we did them in 8H, I think, a bunch of them.
Really?
We did... Those weren't the test shows. Those were like...
the pre-test test
those
shows.
Pre-test test shows where they set me up in 8H, and I was literally interviewing like... Anybody would grab someone who was in the corner.
Right. That was just for you to practice.
That was.
I think Robert was saying that's where you first played around with Andy being sidekick.
Yes.
Ah, yeah.
And I remember, so we were there, and those were just kind of for us. But then we started bringing in audiences, and I want to say we did 8 of them.
Probably.
We might have done 4 and 4.
Sheryl Crow did one of them.
Sheryl Crow did one, and she was a complete. Talk about me being an unknown. I said, and who's this musical guest? And they said, well, she's an elementary school teacher, but she's got an album coming out because she's been,
She was a backup singer.
She was a backup singer, but I think she also had a gig teaching or something. And she's a bank teller or she's a blacksmith. And I remember thinking, oh, she's beautiful and really, she sounds good.
Yeah.
But
she's got something.
Yeah. And so she did a test show. And we were getting the craziest people to do the test shows. It was Mickey Rooney did a test show. Grandpa Al Lewis from the Munsters did a test show. And he's the first person we tried to clutch cargo out on.
Yeah.
And so we thought it'd be fun to have Herman drop down.
Right.
And say oh, hi, Grandpa.
Right.
And we didn't tell him about this. And what we didn't know, or we hadn't really thought it through, I think we mentioned to him something like this would happen. He's like, fine, kid, fine. So Fred Gwynne, who played Herman Munster, had died that summer. And, literally 2 months before. And so the screen comes, Al Lewis is talking, and he's got his big cigar. And the screen comes down. I go, we got someone you want to talk to. And we just thought it would be about you talking to Herman. And he went.
Right, the character.
Yeah. And that he'd be like, oh, Herman, you idiot. Yeah. And they'd go back and forth. It'd be a lot of fun. He starts immediately going, what are you doing here? You're dead! You're dead! I saw you in your box! You're dead! And he said something that to this day, the audience just gets quiet. And he goes, who'd you make it with last night? A wine? And I'm like Andy's been, who'd you make it with last night? A wine? And and then the guy doing Herman Munster's like, Grandpa, how can you talk if you're dead? You had cancer. It was just, and then
the first rule of improv.
First rule of improv is call out death. So the thing goes up, and oh my God, So there were. I remember
We're going to tinker with that.
The very first test show went really well, and I remember being elated, thinking this isn't so hard.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think the second test show was not good at all.
That sounds classic.
And then the third test show was rough, it was a lot of huddling, a lot of trying to fix things.
And then eventually, it's like, oh, it's tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah.
And no one saw the cold open until the night.
No one. I don't think we showed anybody the cold open, which actually became kind of a tradition because I pride ourselves on our cold opens, and we never showed them. Mm-hmm. All those years, all those cold opens, when I would travel shows, when I would do the Emmys, when I would, we never showed any of that stuff to people. We always wanted to wait.
You didn't even want to show them in rehearsal.
No. No. Like, don't waste. If there's any magic in it, if there's any gold dust on that thing, just let it all come off.
And if you really like it, then it's like, we don't need to test this.
We would test it internally.
Sure.
On people.
Like the writers watch them, or you'd call in some.
Yeah, I'd call in Paula Davis. I'd call in different people, and we'd. And it also, I should mention, like, there were people that were hired that summer that are still with us.
Yeah.
So I remember one of the first people that we hired was Jeff came in and told me, it was just a total coincidence, but he said, I hired Paula Davis to be the booker. And I thought, wait a minute, I know Paula because Paula had worked at Saturday Night Live when I was there. And I remember,
she was like a teenager, I think.
I remember walking in, meeting Paula in 1988 and chatting with her and thinking, she reminds me of my sister Kate. She's really funny. She's got something. She was like quick, and she and I were going back and forth, and I was like, I like that Paula Davis. And then, we see each other at SNL, but then I move on, I go on to other things, and then now I'm hearing Paula Davis, and I thought, that's great. Oh, good, Jeff. I like Paula Davis. And then you came in and saw me like maybe just a couple of days later and said, I got us a second producer. And I said, who's that? And you said, his name's Frank Smiley. And I thought, wait a minute. I know Frank Smiley. Total coincidence, I had been at a party when I was on The Simpsons in L.A., and it was this big party, and I got introduced to this guy who was very memorable, named Frank Smiley, and I was kind of doing shtick with him, just as a Simpsons writer and a guy who does shtick 24/7. And I remembered him kind of not like laughing, but not giving it up all the way, and then kind of giving me like you're not bad, kid, you're not bad. And so you told me you hired Frank Smiley, and literally I just know him as a guy I met a year before at a mid Hollywood party where there was a keg, like some dumpy party, and so things started to congeal. Frank Smiley still with us here today.
Yeah.
Paula Davis still booking. I mean, it's 30 years later, and I can't shake these people. Jeff's still here.
Max Weinberg just hangs out.
I'm a bad cold.
Yeah. You were the original COVID. There's nothing I could do to. And then there's a couple of people who've been there almost that long. I don't know who else is in there. Jim Pitt was hired that summer to do music, and he still works with us on
the podcast
radio channel. Anytime I'm talking to anybody in music or doing any of that stuff, that's Jim Pitt. And he was just with me in New York when I interviewed Paul McCartney for the podcast, and I think, we've been doing this for 30 years. It's crazy. It's not late night anymore, but it's all the same to me at this point.
Right.
So anyway, this gets us to, and it might be a good place to stop.
Yeah.
This might be a place to, like, the test shows, all the madness.
We haven't had our first airing yet.
Yeah, the first airing hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And maybe we save that for the next time.
Great.
This is a good place to cut it. But I will say there was some crazy shit that happened. There was a reporter, I think, from USA Today who snuck in.
Yep.
Ooh.
And that's not cool. Like, you're not supposed to do that.
He wanted to make a pie chart about you.
Yeah, and it wasn't a nice pie chart. So this guy came in and looked at a test show and wrote a review, and I want to say his name is something Frazier.
Huh.
Yes. I think he was an AP, or he
was either AP or
AP
might not be USA Today.
There was a lot of apologies that came after that. But you got to remember, there was a different time, because it was a time when a newspaper critic could
meant
really
something.
Great amount of power.
It meant something.
Yes.
It really, I mean, today you wouldn't think that much about it. Your feelings would get hurt. But this guy snuck in. You know, you don't do that for Broadway shows until they invite the critics. Yes. And this person came and wrote a review saying, "This, I hate this." And
they mentioned worms.
No, but he didn't see that one. But he's and I think he said
Frazier Moore, yeah.
Frazier. And he went after Andy.
Oh boy,
in a way that was not cool. And I mean, Andy could tell you this, but I think later on he reached out to Andy to go like, "Hey, buddy," and Andy was like, "No, I don't think so, man. That was not good." But the test shows were horrifying, and then this gets us right up to, I think we took the Friday off. I want to say we took the Friday off, and we had a Saturday and Sunday, and I was. It's so funny because I was just back in New York, and I always pass the old haunts. And I walked right past where I lived, and I remembered my friend who I met in college, who I'm really tight with, Eric Reif. He hung out with me on the Sunday, and we took a football and just tossed a football back and forth in the park, just so I wouldn't be alone and I could unwind. Mm-hmm. And then I remembered us walking back. And it's Sunday, so the show is going to be the next day. And I'm walking up to my apartment across the street from Tavern on the Green and run right into Eric Mink, who was the New York Post
TV guy.
And not a bad guy or anything, but just it's the New York Post, which is, can be, at the time, can be real tough. And I saw him, and he just looked at me and he said, "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Here I am, just trying to, and I have my football, and I went, "Yep, I think we're ready. Yep, I think we're ready." And he was like, "Well, good luck to you then," and kept moving. And I thought, well, there was my fun night out.
Yeah.
But I will say that
he's just lying in wait for it.
I know.
I don't know if this is just to get you up to that day. I read a book, slept like a baby that night.
Wow.
No idea. Well, this is what I remember. We were, that first show, we were loaded for bear. Mm-hmm. And to this day, you can look at that first show, but there's the cold open. Mm-hmm. We had so much prepackaged comedy. We also had so many great, funny ideas. John Goodman.
A lot of guests.
George Wendt, Drew Barrymore.
Tony Randall,
and he and I were going to sing Edelweiss, and there were going to be Nazis in the audience crying and nuns. And I mean, it was... We just put everything into that to make sure that first show was fantastic. So I remembered I just wanted to. There was a famous convict who petitioned. He's like, "I don't want to do life in prison." Gary Gilmore in the 1970s. He said, "I just want to be executed." Mm-hmm. And so the Supreme Court, because they weren't doing any executions anymore, finally said, "Okay, you can die by firing squad in Utah." And so I'm going somewhere with this. There's this moment for a while where Gary Gilmore got to talk to his family and everything, and I never forgot this. He just looked at them at one point and said, "Let's do this," and got up and went out and sat down in a chair and got shot and killed. And I remember this is a horrible comparison, but I remember thinking, let's do this. Like, if I'm going to go out, it's time to find out. Mm-hmm. It's time to find out because I can't live like this anymore. It's been months of who is this guy? What's it going to be?
Yeah.
I think we were blessed by the short amount of time in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. You would have filled the space.
Yeah, exactly.
No, exactly.
It would have been worse.
We would have built it in the round. We would have called it Nighty Night.
That's right.
The cat would.
The Globe Theater.
The cat would have had Andy's part. No. I think that is exactly right. We didn't have enough time, which is as it should be.
Yeah.
And so,
which is what these shows are.
Yeah.
Those shows are.
Right. It
So
continued once it started.
Next time we talk, I guess we'll start at the first show, September 13th, 1993.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nighty night.
Yes!
Night.
Nicely done.
Beautiful. Talk to you in a year.
You got us out.
Now I want to see that show.